it's Laura, and I have another Mixed Media 101 for you. I haven't done one of these in a while because it does take quite a while to film. So I thought we would cover inks today. I am going to show you a lot of things that you can do with the Tim Holtz Distress inks because I really like these, but I also want to talk briefly about some of the other options in ink. I have a few different kinds here. I have StazOn, which is a very permanent ink, and you can watercolor over the StazOn and it will not smear as long as it's dry before you watercolor over it. It's the ultimate permanent ink, and it's the only one that I use on mixed media backgrounds. If I'm going to be painting on top or getting it wet with Distress Oxides, I will stamp with this. So that is StazOn. This is a pigment ink from Color Theory, and I have a dye ink from Tsuniko. It just says Dewdrop, but I think that's the shape. So this is, Memento, right there, duh. A Memento dye ink, and then this is a Versamagic chalk ink. So these three create different effects on paper when you stamp with them. So I'm going to show you really quick what kind of an effect you get with these. Okay. This is just Vicki Boutin Foundations paper. It's best for mixed media. I just find that it works well. So just to show you what we've got here, this is from Studio Calico. It's called Glass Slipper. This one cleans up beautifully. If I get it all over everything, it washes up very easily. So this is my pigment ink. And the properties of a pigment ink are that they stay on the surface and they do take a little bit longer to dry. But once they do dry, they tend to have a more vivid color to them and they don't fade as easily as dye inks. Now this particular Memento dye ink says it's fade resistant, so hopefully it won't fade as much. You're going to get a vivid color at first, but it is going to dry a little bit duller than it started. And it's soaking into the paper. So if you're using this on very thin paper, like mulberry paper, I would not use a dye ink on mulberry paper. It's just going to soak straight into the paper. It's very wet. This does dry faster though, so there is that. Neither of these two inks can be used with water. They will smear and make a mess if you stamp with them. The chalk ink is a different look to it. It does take a little while to dry. It might be hard to see the difference on camera, but you are getting a slightly different texture. It's a little smoother than the pigment ink, a little bit more paint-like in its texture. So that is the chalk ink. The chalk ink is great for using around the sides of a photo or paper just to create a little bit of shadowing. So that is a great way to use it. It does take a while to dry, like I said, whereas the dye ink dries pretty quickly. So those are those four. But now we're going to work a little bit with some options for distress inks. These Ranger Distress inks are a lot of fun to play with. There's a lot of techniques we can do with these, and I want to show you how to do that. So to get started, you can use them as regular inks. Now with the Distress ink, I do find that stamping you don't always get a clear image. Okay, so be aware of that. The colors are very vibrant on the Distress inks, but if you were trying to do a detailed image, let's see if I can find a stamp close by. Here we go, this one's just a word stamp. But if you're trying to use a detailed image it's not going to give you a crisp, clear image. Now watch, it'll do just fine because I'm recording. All right, well, it did okay. But if you look at it up close, you are going to see there's breaks in the color, and it's a little runny. It's spreading a little bit out into the cardstock. So it's not a great ink to use for detailed stamping. It does fine with not detailed, like your big basic shapes. It does pretty well with that, but it doesn't do great for detailed stamps. The Oxides, on the other hand, I think do a little bit better, unless you get them wet, obviously. They seem to be a bit more opaque. A little thicker, and they definitely spread. They definitely spread out, but you're not going to get a super clear image with either of these inks, in my opinion. One of the fun things, and I'm going to show you the difference between the Distress Oxide and the Distress ink, but real quick, the colors I'm using for Distress Oxide are Abandoned Coral and Mermaid Lagoon, and then the regular Distress ink is Mowed Lawn and Fired Brick. I tried to pick different colors so that it would be obvious which one was which. So with the Distress Oxide, I can use my water brush and watercolor straight off the ink pad. Probably put a little too much water on this, but it happens. So you get nice, beautiful, vivid color that way. You can take the ink pad, put it on your page, and paint with it from there without adding water. It's very juicy. It works really well for that. So that is an option. Just clean my brush real quick. Another technique you can use is to do the packaging technique. And what you're going to do here is you're going to stamp directly onto some plastic packaging left over from your supplies. You're going to mist on a little bit of water. And I have seen people mist it onto the cardstock as well. I don't know if you need to do that necessarily, but I think it helps move the color a little bit better. And then you're just going to spread the color around. And you just lift up the packaging to spread it around the page. This creates some really cool splatter effects. You can mix your colors a little bit if you like, but it is very messy. If it's too saturated in color, it will react to water, so you are going to get an interesting reaction there, removing a lot of the pigment. Another cool technique with this particular ink is one that I saw first on Inky Quill, but I know others have done it as well. Just getting your fingers a little bit wet, droplet, droplet, droplet. Wait a few moments for that to soak into the ink. The longer you wait, the bigger reaction you're going to get. You can already see it's causing some splotching. Pick up the extra ink and you get this fantastic, almost marbly sort of effect that is very, very cool. Now with the Distress inks, it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to look a little bit different. So let me show you the packaging technique first because it's super messy. And I'm already messy, so why not, right? Again, that water is going to help it move around because there is no gesso on this paper. Alright, so you're just moving it around with the packaging. You can decide how much color you want, where you're going to put it. You can get some really nice splattery effects here. And if it's too vivid, again, mop up a little bit with either a paper towel or a baby wipe. And then again with your splattering, you can still do this water technique. And pick up some of the color to get those nice little water spots on there. You will notice the difference here between a oxide and a distress ink. The distress ink is much more transparent or see-through than the oxide ink. The oxide ink is much more opaque. It is going to have a more saturated color, it's going to be more vivid, and it's going to be darker. It's just going to have a very, very darker theme. You're not going to see through it as easily as the regular distress ink. So keep that in mind and what type of project that you're doing. Now, they're available in roughly the same colors for each set, the oxides and the regular. Not all of the oxides are out yet, but they will be available in all of the same colors as your regular distress inks. You can watercolor with this distress ink as well, directly off of the pad, or if you don't want to do that, you can stamp it first and then paint for a more vivid color. Okay, so that is available in both. Again, you are going to have a more opaque look with the oxide inks. Number 3, we're going to mix with some modeling paste and some texture paste. So we'll just use this Distress Oxide, Banded Coral, as well as our Fired Brick Distress Ink. And I'm going to take a little bit of the modeling paste and mix it in with some of both inks. Okay, so I have a stencil here, and we're just going to smoosh some of this modeling paste through the stencil. So this is one way you can use it. Gives you a nice, bright, vivid color for that modeling paste. Okay, and mix it with our other color. It has more of a red tone. Okay. More of a red tone with that one. So then I'm going to take the glaze, which is very shimmery and shiny. We're going to mix it. It's much smoother too. It's not as thick as the modeling paste. It's very soft, and I think it's much easier to work with than modeling paste, in my opinion. It does take a little bit longer to dry, but I think that the effect of the shimmer and the shine is really, really nice. So let's do some of that for comparison. All right, and then I'll bring in a little bit more of the Distress Ink to add to some glaze. Okay, so you can see the difference As I move it around, we got some shimmer on the glaze side and none on the modeling paste side. Now in this respect, these two inks work equally well for this technique. One is not necessarily better than the other. I do think that they both become very opaque once you mix them with a glaze or a modeling paste. Something else I should mention though is when you mix it with the modeling paste, you're going to get a much more crisp look through a stencil, and the reasoning for that is because it is thicker. The glaze is much softer, and so you are going to get a little tiny bit of running, but I actually kind of like that look on some projects, so that's a little heads up there. Okay, you can also use both of these inks through a stencil just as they are. This is a blending tool from Ranger, and it doesn't take a lot of ink to get color. And you want to move in a circular motion here. If I didn't mention it before, I am working on a Fiskars mixed media mat, which is easily cleanable with baby wipes. Now I will change out the little pad thing for each color. So here's the Distress Oxide. Doesn't need very much at all for these. And you're going to get a nice vibrant color on your paper. Okay, so there's that. You don't have to use a stencil for this technique. You could go directly to the page and you get nice vibrant color without a whole lot of ink. It's not loaded full. it doesn't take very much. So you could just do it that way. Another way to do through a stencil, now we will notice here that the Oxide gave us a bit of a better look through the stencil. The regular Distress ink did bleed a little bit. So, and that was with the circular motion. You can also do a bit of a gradient using the pouncing technique, is what I've heard it called. And it's just simply pouncing up and down through your stencil, and you can get more of a gradient technique and not quite such an opaque look. Okay, so here you're going to see you get more of that kind of faded to some areas, not completely solid, and that is a technique that you may want to try. Again, with the Distress ink, it's going to look a little different. So let's do this. Okay, just gonna have a little bit of bleeding with the regular Distress ink. I do find that that is the case. Another technique that you can use is for splattering. So for this technique, I'm gonna put down some color, add a little water or a lot of water, and splatter. Just like you've seen people do with mists and sprays, you can do it with these as well. This also works with the distress inks. Just for comparison. Oh, we need more water. There we go. More water, more water. Want bigger droplets? Splatter harder. Lighter droplets, just sort of tap it. But big ones, whop. Gotta get a lot of water and plop, plop, plop. There you go. My mixed media mat here, and I'm just going to do a little bit of the distress ink and a little bit of the oxide side by side so you can kind of see the difference. All right, they kind of mixed a little, but it's all right. I'm gonna spray some water on here. And we're just going to swish down our paper. And you can get a really cool look as a background for a card. Got a little bit of mixing, but I wanted to show you though that the oxide, the blue oxide side is a little bit more opaque. The distress ink side, not as much. Hopefully that shows up on camera. Okay, so if I had done that with, let's use some blue in a couple of spots, and some of the distress ink in green. All right, and then we mix it together with some water because it does react to water. We're just going to kind of mix it. How cool does that look? Gonna dab away any extra water. Around the edges. But isn't that a very cool look? And for the very last bonus technique, you're gonna need one extra thing, a crayon. And I'm just going to draw with white crayon some fun hearts on one side, nothing fancy, hearts on the other side, and I'm going to show you two ways to use your stamps on this. This also would work with clear embossing powder. It's going to create a resist effect. So if you want to use clear embossing powder and a stamp, it would have the same effect. So I'm going to show you two things here. I'm going to show you straight from the ink pad and swirling around here. So we get a really cool effect there. So then using, actually I'll just use the same one, that'll be fine. The distress ink. All right, which is a more red color than the coral. Works both ways. Now I think that the oxide does a little better at masking the shape of the blending tool. Just a heads up on that. So that's just blended right on. Now we're going to try the masking technique as a watercolor. So draw my little hearts on here. There we go. Just a few little fun hearts. We're going to use some Distress Oxide on this side, and let's go with the green regular Distress ink on the other side. Here we go. And my watercolor brush. There we go. And we're just going to watercolor over the top of that, which has another very cool effect on this crayon resist. I hope you will give these a try. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite technique that I showed you is. I did not make up these techniques. These are techniques that I either found in other places or just happily discovered while playing, but was not the first one to discover it, obviously. These have been around for a little while, and yeah, they're a lot of fun to play with. Again, you're going to get a more opaque look from the Oxide, but I think that is really fun. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I had a great time experimenting with you and showing you some new techniques for your ink pads. If you have any questions, also leave those in the comment below. I wanted to show you very quickly a super simple layering technique that you can do with your ink pads. So I have put just some straight ink on here. I can take my stencil and a baby wipe, just a regular baby wipe, and rub it through the stencil on top of the ink like this. I am using a little bit of pressure to move that baby wipe through the stencil. And that creates a very cool model-y background. So that is a very neat technique as well.